Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some transfer portal superlatives that Chris Hummer over at CBS put out, kind of broke down what some teams are looking for, some positions that everyone should be watching throughout that time, but now it's time for a Top 10 Tuesday, and I am giving my best players in the country as of this second. This is not an easy thing to put together, so spare me a little bit, but it'll be an interesting list, and I'm sure everyone will totally agree with me 100%. But this is the top 10 as I have it right now. To start it off, I do have Caleb Downs at number one. Now, that might be a little bit of a projection into I think he can be, but we saw it last year. A guy leading Alabama in tackles as a freshman is not something we see very often. He is an absolute difference maker. He is someone that can do so many different things, and transferring over to Ohio State, he is in a room that is absolutely loaded, but he is the best guy in that room by a pretty comfortable margin. So I think he's someone that totally transforms pretty much any defense he's on. I think he is someone that Alabama would have loved to keep in Tuscaloosa, but wasn't quite able to, and I think he'll only continue to improve through the next 2 years. I think he could be one of the highest taken safeties off the board when he eventually goes into the draft because the dude is just so dynamic in so many different ways. Number two, I actually had the same thing that Blake Brockermeyer had. I do have James Pierce Jr. as the second best player in the country. I think he's a total difference maker on the edge for Tennessee. I think he will only get better as a pass rusher, but totally dominant, one of the most impactful players in the entire country. He is one of the few non-quarterbacks in my mind that can go number one overall next year. I think there are a couple on this list that we'll get to throughout as we go through it, but I think James Pierce Jr. kind of leads that, right? There are so many guys that are looking for a dominant edge rusher, and if he was in this class, he might be the number one edge rusher taken off the board, to be totally honest with you. So I think he's a total difference maker. He's only going to get better, and this year is going to be very special for James Pierce Jr., if I had to imagine. At three, I do have Travis Hunter. He's a game changer. There's no two ways about it. Probably the best athlete in the entire country. He is simultaneously one of the best corners and one of the best wide receivers in the country. So it's just remarkable what he can do on a football field. Essentially has free reign to do whatever he wants, and he absolutely should. He is another guy that could go number one overall if the chips fall his way. There's been some news around that with Deion Sanders dropping the 6 teams that he's quote-unquote allowed to go to, but we'll break that down later in the week and kind of get into that a little bit. But he's someone that's a total difference maker for this team all over the field. Obviously, a difference maker on the defensive side of the ball, but what he's able to do on the offensive side just shouldn't be allowed with how good he is at corner. Him being that good at wide receiver is just unfair. But at number 4, I do have Will Campbell. He is the best O-lineman in the country in my mind. He is going to be an absolute beast when he gets to the next level, but since he touched the field as a freshman, he's been incredible. He's only gotten better, but even when he was a freshman, you looked at this kid and just thought he looked different. So it'll be really interesting to see if he can go number one overall next year. I think he absolutely can. If the Panthers repeat as the top pick this upcoming year, I think I wouldn't be surprised at all if they went after Campbell. They need a guy to help out with Bryce Young, especially on that blind side, and Will Campbell would be a great pick if the Panthers were in that position again. So definitely something to watch as the next season of the NFL kind of unfolds and we see what the draft is going to look like. But Mason Graham is at 5 for me. This dude's a force. He is just insane. He's going to change games for Michigan pretty much week in, week out, is an elite run defender, which is something that Michigan has kind of hung their hat on for quite some time now, but it might be the best it's been in quite some time this year. I think him and Kenneth Grant in the middle there is one of the best duos in the country, probably the best duo in the entire country. They'll be the focal point of this defense. Obviously, last year you had guys littered around this defense all over the place, but now Mason Graham and Will Johnson are kind of the guys pulling a lot of the weight. So it'll be interesting to see how he kind of steps into that role and how dominant he can be. But this guy is going to change games for Michigan all year and will definitely give their offense a little bit of leeway to kind of find their way as this new quarterback takes over and all of the new things happen over there. But at 6, I do have Luther Burden, around the same place I believe that Brockermeyer had him. And this guy is just insane. I think he's the best wide receiver in the country. He's just been incredible to watch throughout his career. A lot of people, when he committed to Missouri, thought he would be finding a new place to play in, a year after that. And he stayed put. They've only gotten better since he's been there. And he's someone that totally changes the complexion of that team pretty much overnight. So I think he will definitely be the top wide receiver off the board next year. I think he definitely could be one of the best players in the entire class, to be totally honest with you. So it'll be really interesting to see him develop over this last year. He's already shown us plenty, to be totally honest with you, but I think he still has more in his bag to show us. So I'd be really excited to see what happens with him. At 7, I do have Carson Beck. I think he's the best quarterback in the country. I totally understand why people have Shedeur Sanders or Jalen Milroe over him, but at the end of the day, I feel so good about this kid going into next year. I think he's going to light the world on fire. He has so many weapons to throw to. He puts the ball pretty much wherever he wants it. On a rope, so he's someone definitely to watch. He is currently my pick to be the number 1 overall pick next year, just because that tends to go to a quarterback, and I expect him to be the top quarterback in the country next year. I think a Heisman is definitely in the cards for him, and could be on the way with how that offense is looking early on in the spring and early on in the offseason. But definitely much more to develop there, but I just love this kid. I think he's an absolute game changer and one of the best pure throwers of the football I've seen, at the very least since Joe Burrow was in LSU in 2019. But at the 8 position, I do have Kelvin Banks, the other offensive lineman, just a touch below Will Campbell, to be totally honest with you. Both of them have been great since they've been freshmen, but Will Campbell was just a little bit sooner to get all the kinks worked out and kind of become that dominant force on the offensive line. I think both the guys could be top 10 picks next year and will be huge for both their quarterbacks. So Kelvin Banks is incredible. He's been incredible since he stepped on the field at Texas, and Quinn Ewers is definitely very happy to have Kelvin Banks protecting his blind side throughout his time at Texas. But to round it out here, at 9, we have Tatorian McMillan, the remarkable wide receiver from Arizona right now. Just a touch below Luther Burden to me. They both do just incredible things, are incredibly built, do so many remarkable things on the football field. So you can line him up all over the field. He is going to be a matchup nightmare. And I think him and Noah Fafita being in lockstep is a huge win for him, because there's a world where he is the most productive wide receiver in the country, and then maybe the scales tip in his favor, because I think him and Luther Burden are really fighting for that top wide receiver spot, and the gap is not super wide. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens there throughout the season. And then to round it out, I have Abdul Carter. I think this dude is one of the best athletes in the country. I might only put him second to Travis Hunter, to be totally honest with you. The size and the speed is just insane. I think him coming off the edge is a great decision by this Penn State coaching staff. I think that adds a certain dynamic to their defense that they have had in the past necessarily, but they haven't quite, hit the massive potential, I suppose, that they could have. I think Chop Robinson was just remarkable. I think Abdul Carter could be even better, and be a guy that they just drafted as a defensive player next year, to be totally honest with you. Just draft him and let him just kind of play defense and do whatever he wants. So would be very interested to see how that kind of develops throughout the year. I think he's going to be a total difference maker for this Penn State team throughout the year, and it'll be really, really interesting to watch him kind of state his claim, I suppose, at edge rushing. Is he drafted as an edge rusher? Is he drafted as a linebacker? Is he just drafted as a dude? And you just kind of let him do his thing. We'll find out, but I think he definitely could be the top defender taken off the board next year, especially with the season I expect to have for him. But some honorable mentions here that could definitely give Abdul Carter a run for his money. Will Johnson, Harold Perkins, Malachi Starks, all remarkable defensive players that can do just insane things this upcoming year. And then I had Quinn Ewers just off the list as well. He, in my opinion, is the second best quarterback in the country and has the ability to kind of hit a new level this upcoming year. So I think all those guys, you could rank them pretty much any order you want. I'm sure there are plenty of people that do not agree with this list right here, but it's really tough to put together a top 10 player in the country list, especially in a year like this with so much talent littered across the country that it's really hard to sparse through it all and make sure that you have the right guys. But at the end of the day, I feel pretty good about my top 10. I think it's really hard to put together, but at the end of the day, having the guys that I have, I feel pretty secure in that. But definitely let me know what you think about that. Let me know what your top 10 is if you want to take a crack at it. But that will do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network, Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for content and updates. We have so many people covering pretty much every sport you could think of, whether you're a baseball fan, football fan, a wrestling fan, it doesn't matter. So we have it all covered for you. We have a new women's sports podcast that is going to be launching here very soon, so definitely check that out when you have a chance. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.